everybody, welcome back to Unlimited Commander. I've been notified as I was editing last week's episode that not once in this entire journey have I introduced myself in this intro. So, how's it going? I'm Adam, and today I'm joined, as always, by my lovely co-host, Matt. Matt,
Hi,
how's
Matt.
it
going? Things are going good. Feeling a lot better from last week, so all the well wishes out there, thank you so much for saying hey and letting me know that you think that I should feel better. I do. And other than that, been doing pretty good, just getting things ready for the coming weeks and the things that we've got coming up, along with playing way too much Marvel Snap. I've now gotten a close friend into Marvel Snap on accident, and she and I went through probably 25 minutes of conversation on whether or not she should buy the season pass. By the way, just as a note, if you play Snap, you probably should just buy the season pass. It's pretty cheap, and it gets you a card that is much higher in rank as far as trying to get later than you're going to want it to be. So, I mean, just know that. But it was an exhausting conversation that spanned over multiple days. I say 25 minutes of conversation, but we're talking about like 5 or 6 minutes at a time, 5 days in a row. And I'm just like, oh, just buy it or don't. Like, please.
That's funny how that works sometimes.
Exactly.
Trying to explain to people, and then I don't know. You and I get into conversations like this all the time, but usually they at least result in no money because we just talk about the things we like anyway.
Yeah. I know that it wasn't meant to be like an annoying thing at me, but no. Since I wasn't feeling well, I was just like, you can do it or not. I didn't even tell you to play. You can do it or not do it. I'm like, I love having you around, but you don't have to you don't need me for this decision.
No. And certain conversations require a lot of load when you're not feeling great anyway.
For sure. How about you? How are things going?
Pretty good overall. I've been working a lot on our house in a spring cleaning venture. Managed to offload a couple of items that we've been not really excited or enamored with anymore over the last couple days. I remember just how much I hate people on like Facebook Marketplace and Kijiji.
Oh, yes.
Very stressful. And a couple days left till I get to take the bandage off on my little Taco Buddy tattoo. So quite looking forward to getting off and giving it a wash and looking at how good it's healing. Really happy with how it turned out overall. So I'm excited to get to show it off without, I don't even know what you call this. It looks better than it did after the first day, but I think it could look better.
That's so cool, though. Like, just so that the people out there know, Adam and his partner went and got matching taco tattoos, and they are adorable. They're little cartoony tacos with legs and faces, and they're quite cute.
You can see a picture of them on the day we got them on my Twitter over at Adamus_Prime86 on Twitter.
Yeah, so
that's
definitely
plugs. Yeah. So today, and it's quite funny that this got to where it got because Matt and I spent a lot of time talking about what ended up being probably our next episode, and we realized we needed to do some setup for that episode. So we've got this episode. So you need to pick a Boxmander set. You have heard us talk about Boxmander on at least one other episode. I don't remember how many times we mentioned it, but the long and short is building a commander deck out of a sealed box of boosters, much like you would do a sealed build, say a pre-release or something like that, but with a full 36 packs and building a 100-card deck. And that sounds like a pretty onerous adventure, as we have discovered in past tries with ourselves. I know that we did one specifically with the set we're going to talk about today, but I know, Matt, you've done several of them. What would you say? Just give me like a quick smack. What is a good Boxmander set like?
So I think that, there's a lot of stuff that applies to a thing, and we'll go through the nitty gritty here in a little bit. But the most important thing I think to pay attention to when you are doing a Boxmander set is how is it going to play as a sealed component in regards to Commander. So I think it's probably best to go ahead and run through, but our piece by piece breakdown. But just remember that before we do any of this, is that we are assuming that someone's going to buy a box and use a box. So we based a lot of this criteria based on you are going to purchase a box and use it for Boxmander. If you are doing anything like using a simulation and make proxies or anything like that, the rules can differ a little bit. You can also change your rules to fit what you're doing. But in general, this is sort of the overall cascading thing. I think the first criteria is the most important part to me, which is sealed environment quality. In general, something that worked really well in sealed is going to work really well in Boxmander, because Boxmander is just a heightened version of sealed. So using something that did well as a sealed product will do well as a Boxmander product. The main thing that I look at when it comes to whether or not something's good in sealed is deep, self-contained mechanics. So real quick, Adam, you haven't played too much sealed. What's your background with sealed recently?
I had a real bad showing with All Will Be One.
Okay.
Cracked up on Arena and built a really bad deck out of like a not real great set of cards.
Mm-hmm. So you at the through the course of your adventure with All Will Be One sealed, so far it's felt murky for you, right? And it feels like the card cohesion isn't there or something like that. That would probably transfer over into Boxmander for you, at least at this juncture.
I could see that. Yeah, like I don't think that it was like, because man, it's funny. I didn't expect to be put on the spot. I
Got him.
don't think that sealed is necessarily bad in All Will Be One. A lot of their through lines and stuff, they do work pretty well together, and you can see that with how some of the cards are designed. I just think that I didn't get a very great.
Yeah, your pool wasn't.
Not a lot of cohesion. It had too many little bits of
Mm-hmm.
a lot of things. Like mine had not enough of the little creatures that you need to do the toxic, but it also didn't have enough of like the sacrifice of like the Rakdos, and it didn't have enough of the proliferate. Like it was spread too thin.
That's exactly what I wanted to touch on. So you actually did exactly what I needed. Thank you, sir.
Hey.
So when I'm talking about deep self-contained mechanics, remember that in a sealed environment, you are very, very limited on the number of packs you get, where Boxmander gives you a lot more packs and therefore gives you a lot more option where you wouldn't have had it before. But it is important that the mechanics jive in a way that lets you kind of spread out if you need to, because you are still playing sealed. You're still within a color restriction, so you got to make sure that things work out well. All Will Be One, I do think, has some solid stuff, and we'll talk about that another time. But one of the big ones that I bring up down here is Kaldheim. So in Kaldheim, there's a snow mechanic. There's a bunch of cards that count on you having snow cards, having snow lands, having all these other things. Even in Boxmander, snow is probably not your best mechanic to rely on, because you are going to be stuck in a particular color. You are going to get 36 snowlands for sure. There's one in each pack. However, they are not all guaranteed to be in the colors that you are playing. And there's a good chance that it's going to be very hard for you to get away with playing something that requires you to have 3 or more snow permanents on the board, or 3 or more whatever on the board. So it really didn't work in the sealed environment, and I'd be worried about trying it in the Boxmander set. Also, sets like Midnight Hunt and Crimson Vow have mixed mechanics, and they require each other to work well. So a box of Crimson Vow will be lacking in what it needs to get the job done, and a box of Midnight Hunt is likely to be lacking in the mechanics that it needs to get the job done. But in between the two, if you were to get, say, a box of Double Feature that features both in even distributions for whatever reason they decided to do that, it actually makes it a pretty good sealed environment, because you're getting half of one and half of the other and making sure that you're able to jive those mechanics together. So for Boxmander, it'd actually probably be pretty good.
So we took a bit of a deep dive into Dominaria United for figuring out just kind of like, again, we know very well that this set worked because we tried it. But you brought up an interesting thing that I didn't write down, and I'm going to throw it at you. And some of this may or may not get cut because it's going to be a lot of reading. But I'm going to give you the draft archetypes for DMU.
Okay.
And you probably played a lot more of this in this way than I did, but we're going to take a quick peek because we didn't write this down. Which one of these would you say is probably the weakest? And which one would you say is probably the strongest as far as sealed went? And if it would work well when you try to Boxmander with Dominaria United? Because
sure, let's run through.
We're gonna touch on this in a bit. So we've got white blue was flying tempo, showcasing spells.
Mm-hmm.
Blue black was Demure control.
Mm-hmm.
Blue red was spells matter aggro.
Mm-hmm.
Blue green was kicker ramp.
Mm-hmm.
Red black was reckless aggro with sacrifice payoffs. Red green was stompy with domain synergies. Red and white was token aggro with enlist synergies. White green was go wide with domain. Go wide tokens specifically, sorry. White black was mid-range sacrifice and gain, drain and gain. And black green was graveyard and reanimation mid-range with domain.
So classically speaking, when it comes to draft formats, the Golgari is always woefully underdrafted, and usually because it's very hard to get that reanimator balance going. The graveyard shenanigans are kind of hard to get the right mixture of payoff versus value, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in general, all of the big creatures that you want to play would fit just as well in a red-green deck or in a black-red deck, and will generally manage to do more effectiveness by not ending up in your graveyard first. So I would say that green-black is probably one of the lower performers in draft in general, but even in Domu, I think also had a lower performance rate unless you could draft everything. And blue-white is always good. Like, you will hear people joke nonstop on streams that Flyers is always good. It's like, I heard Flyers are good in this set. Flyers are good in every set because evasion is good in every single set. So whenever you're playing sealed or draft, and in Boxmander as well, Flyers are going to be good because having any sort of evasion automatically puts you up on a higher list. Red-green was really good when we did Boxmander. I believe I was playing General Marshall when we did Boxmander, and it was just red-green pump and stomp, and it did really well. Like, I actually held pretty good considering the three other decks at the table were two Joda decks and a Rith the Awakener deck. So we did all right. We did okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So I just asked because you had said that like deep self-contained mechanics are good and that some can be bad even in a set. So would you say that like specifically referring, you said the weakest one would have probably been the Golgari self-mill domain. Would that be viable if you were to crack a box of DMU and do a...
Oh, sure, yeah. So when you're dealing with sealed, one thing is that since you're in sealed, the decks will have a little less focus than they normally would in a draft format anyway. So green-black could be very useful within it. But like one format that didn't get brought up in the archetypes, at least I didn't hear it, was domain. And
it was sprinkled in a few of the other ones. There wasn't any that was like, please look at domain as a thing. It was like Golgari had domain as like synergies. It's more like they sprinkled it in and created synergies within.
Right.
Black, green, white, green, red, green, because domain is predominantly a green mechanic anyway.
Yeah.
Blue, green had kickers, so like you could probably get away with it, and then like that's all 4. Okay, so it's sprinkled in 3 of the 4 as far as this quick outline I googled has.
Which makes sense because green is the domain color. You've got the most chances of being able to make multiple land types happen when you're starting with the ramp color. Makes sense. But when you think about it in terms of Boxmander, where domain would not be a normally good thing to like main focus on in a sealed format, because one, you're not going to hit enough different like domain cards to be good, but you're also not going to hit enough like you aren't going to want to spread out into 5 colors to make domain happen in an effective way. You're just gonna like you'll be really tight on space in a 40 card deck. In a Boxmander deck, which tends to be 100 cards, but even if it's 60 or 80, you've got a lot more opportunity to take advantage of those domain cards, and you can use all of your fixing from your box to help you along the way. Dominaria United was huge on fixing, so that would be a really good place for domain to rise, and we saw that in our own little groups. Like I said, we had 2 players playing Joda and another player playing Rith, a 3-color deck.
It wasn't Rith. There was a slight caveat. We'd actually let one of the players had picked up a set booster box, and we had let them use that because they'd already bought it. And that individual cracked Tiamat. It was
Tiamat. That's right. It wasn't.
So it was 3 5-color decks.
3 5-color decks, and then me playing Marshall. That's right. Yeah. I think originally that player was going to play Rith. That's what messed me up. But Tiamat, and so Tiamat was played. Dragon deck, another 5-color deck with plenty of fixing, and could also work in any of the domain cards that they needed to make work. Timeless Lotus is in that set, which gives you another multicolor mana payoff. It's pretty good in Boxmander. It makes a lot of payoffs and a lot of enablers in Boxmander, where you wouldn't necessarily see that in the sealed, but the pool is deep enough and it's all within Dominaria United that as long as you get a 5-color commander, you're set, Yeah.
So I'd say, like, in particular, I think we're a little in the, like, we've gone pretty deep into that. I would say that it's actually probably the best in Boxmander, because in constructed Commander, there's just more things to do than focus on your domain. And I think domain is actually pretty weak in regular Commander.
It is.
But it, like, the incremental value of saying, like, okay, so like more things are like, you get domain, like domain being, of course, it counts up the basic land types you control. So if you're playing a 3-color Naya, and you've got a plains, a mountain, and a forest, your domain is 3. So then that incremental value in a sealed environment, like a Boxmander environment, is probably a lot more valuable than if you were to play it in constructed, where like you're getting whatever value piece you're doing. Could draw domain number of cards. 3 cards in like Boxmander is great, but you've got a lot more efficient ways in constructed to draw 3, or you're drawing 10. Yeah. So I think that one worked out pretty well. That's all I wanted to just to tie it on in. So there was a lot of really good mechanics that could be easily adapted in Dominaria United, which does make it a very excellent Boxmander pick, and why we're going to go into it for the rest.
Yeah, and while we're on the subject, we've talked about the sealed environment, and that's good. But this is Boxmander, which means that it's a commander variant, and since we're doing a commander variant, the next criteria is legendary creatures, because we're playing commander.
Hey, you need one of those. There's one quick little shot here that if you're dealing with another set, like any set out of Magic's history, you might not get the just sheer volume of legendaries in a set period. If you're deciding to choose an older set that has a more limited number of legendaries, Rule Zero exists. Talk it out with your friends, figure it out. But we're going to assume you're picking a set that is, I don't know, the last like 4 years worth of Magic or something, where they've really started doubling down on the legendary type. And so we're just assuming there's a whole bunch.
Yeah.
And so like they won't always equal out. You know, it's not like every one of them has 45 of them or something. Mm-hmm. It's that like some may have like 15 to 20, some may have 45. And, you know, take a look when you're picking your box, figure it out. But we've got a couple of numbers here that we dug out specifically about Dominaria United to give you what like a really good set in this regard looks like. Dominaria United has 41 legendary creatures spanning across the uncommon, rare, and mythic rarities, and that's a boatload. So that means that like if you were to take a quick gander, you get 3 uncommons in every pack and 1 rare. I actually didn't bust out which one was in each rarity slot, but I'm pretty sure that because legendary was a really big sub theme of Dominaria United specifically, I'm pretty sure they like made sure that you had at least 1 in every pack somehow. I don't remember for sure, don't quote me, mm-hmm. but I remember opening it and like that was kind of the case. It was mm-hmm. pretty up there.
Yeah. And it's true. I think Dominaria United and the Brothers War were all built with a very legendary creature focus in mind. So of course all 3 of those fit very well into this situation. Dominaria United was the first time in a long time that they had printed a solid number. Or not Dominaria United, my apologies. Dominaria is the first time in a long time that they had printed uncommon commanders, and they printed quite a few of them with regular efficiency. And since then, we have seen that more often. There are more uncommon legendaries in general. There are more legendaries per pack or per box than there normally were because there's more per set. But you do want to try to go for a set with multicolored legendaries and a lot of them, just to give yourself enough color identity to get through, but also to give you that versatility of it's like, well, I do want to play green-black. I got this green-black-white commander that's okay, but I got this green-black-blue commander that fits a lot more of the green-black cards that I've gotten out of this box. So I can use that instead. And then you can just tool in whatever else you need to happen.
And it is important to note, too, that like when we said 41 legendary creatures in Dominaria United, 5 of them are monocolored, which is possible, but the strictest of definitions. Like you open, I don't remember how much it was. We actually did this math one time, and I'm going to figure it out right now, just so I have it in my head. So with 36 boosters and 14 cards in each. I think they count the basic land as one of those cards. 504 of those. Let's say that across all things, it's not quite the perfect balance, but we're going to say that roughly speaking, you have a roughly average number of each color. And then I think it's usually pretty close to about 1 color's worth divided amongst artifacts and multicolored. So we're going to divide this by 6. Which gives you 84 cards in any given color, give or take. Duplicates, of course, exist. So let's just divide that in half. Because I think if you were to look at it and say, like, if you ended up with, I'm just spitballing this. I'm totally coming up with this on the fly. But my justification being that, like, you would end up with, on average, 3 of every common. And 2 of every uncommon, give or take, 1 to 2?
Roughly, yeah.
And then, like, at most 1 of every, like, some of the rares in a given color. So I would say that, like, roughly 42 cards of that are going to be unique when you're dealing with Boxmander specifically. It's not quite enough to make a whole deck, but if you were to start adding in some of the artifacts, maybe you got lucky. Monocolored out of a Boxmander, possible. Probably not great, though.
It's not, your odds aren't better. If you are looking to do monocolor out of a Boxmander, you better hope that you're dealing in an artifact set. Like, it's much more likely in Brothers War than it's going to be in Dominaria.
I would agree to that.
Yeah.
So, just food for thought. It's not like, this isn't a hard and fast rule. Just something to keep in mind when you're thinking about doing this. Like, is it an artifact heavy set that I'm going to do a Boxmander out? Maybe I will get away with monocolor, but I really wouldn't suggest like going in with the goal.
Yeah.
Map.
The harder you make it on yourself to start with, the harder that might be the way that you obtain enjoyment from playing a sealed event. I feel that sealed has enough restrictions as is. You probably do not need to put a personal restriction on yourself.
Yeah, and if you want to do that, don't listen to us. Do what you want.
Yep, exactly.
we're just talking about our own experience mostly. Yeah, that's that. Did you already pick one?
I did, actually. So we're going to go ahead and take a breather just for a minute. We're going to go ahead and do a random scry fall for this week. As usual, we're just doing another card evaluation based on the various things that we run. So how it does in Sealed and Draft, how it does in Cube, how it does in Commander, or some other constructed. And this week's card is Oath of Kaya from War of the Spark. So Oath of Kaya, real quick, is 1 a white and a black for a rare. It's a legendary enchantment. When Oath of Kaya enters the battlefield, it deals 3 damage to any target, and you gain 3 life. And then it has, whenever an opponent attacks a planeswalker you control with 1 or more creatures, Oath of Kaya deals 2 damage to that player, and you gain 2 life.
How did this do in limited at the time?
So
I did not. This is way out of my realm. I was not even paying attention during War of the Spark.
So War of the Spark was very interesting, sealed and draft format. War of the Spark was the only set so far, if I'm remembering correctly, that has had uncommon planeswalkers. No, we eventually did end up getting uncommon versions in like M20 and M21. We got
it fleshed out a bit more. But that set, you're not wrong in saying that set had like the greatest volume of them. Like that was like the
War of the Spark's big gimmick was all the planeswalkers are here, right? Like it's the Smash Brothers of planeswalkers. So it's had a good format for drafting for planeswalkers. If you wanted to, like you could pick up a few planeswalkers. Now the black-white planeswalkers weren't necessarily the best of them. It was pretty tough. Like Teo is very defensive planeswalker. Wanderer was a removal planeswalker. In black, you had Davriel, which was about discard. You had Ob Nixilis, which was also about sort of like drawing and killing things. Another semi-removal planeswalker. And then Kaya herself, which exiled things, wasn't super great. So in a sealed or a draft environment, Oath of Kaya didn't really hit super hard. Where this card did some work was in the appropriate standards after this came out.
Yeah, I can see that.
So in the standards after this came out, that's where 3 Fairy is during that standard, and I think 5 Theory was also in this standard because
sure,
maybe.
I don't remember now. This is also like, keep in mind too that this was printed in like 2019, like later in the year, and then Throne of Eldraine came out, and then we were locked down. So
yeah, exactly. The lockdown happened.
Standard at the time was kind of a funny beast. Nobody really knew what was happening at the time.
But I remember the biggest issue of this card was actually its ETB effect, because Dance of the Manse had a weird deck going on where you would get rid of this and revive it and do 3 damage to something and gain 3 life, and then get rid of it and bring it back. And suddenly you've taken like 13 or 12 or 15 damage from this. And it was just like a reusable lightning helix. And it was rough. Like there were times where this card could really do a lot of work in that constructed field. In the limited field, I wouldn't say much.
Not so much.
Now, what about Cube? Looking at this card, having been the Cube builder of us.
Uh, so I could say like it has. I would as just like at first glance, it's very flexible. Uh, it's always nice to find cards that can serve multiple purposes for your cube, so that they fit into multiple decks. Oath of Kaya is an enchantment. A lot of like depending on how you've built your cube, enchantments might matter to you. It is a removal spell, not a terribly efficient one, but it's a removal spell. Like as it is,
Mm-hmm.
it is a life gain spell. Like this could sneak into a few different archetypes, and that's just a face value. Would, I don't actually know if I have a single planeswalker in my cube. I might have just avoided the card type in general. But I mean, if you're playing with, a decent number of planeswalkers, it could serve as a little bit of a like ghostly prison type effect if that's your jam.
Mm-hmm.
But like I would include it in a lot of cubes just based off the fact that it does like 3 or 4 different things. It's got appropriate card types. It's got a pretty reasonable mana value for what it does. It's very budget friendly. Currently sitting at 41 cents.
Absolutely.
That's pretty good.
The price is right.
And I think that also goes to like regular Commander too. Like I don't see this slamming into every single deck, but like there's a few that it fits pretty nice into. I mean, we've been talking about Joda. Joda would do okay with this. Sometimes it's nice to just have like a removal spell that does. I actually, hilariously, not in my actual paper Joda deck, but I do also have Joda on Arena, and this is a house Joda on Arena because slamming it down for 3 mana, getting the Joda trigger, and like cascading down through, that does really nice. I play with far more Planeswalkers on Arena than I do in my actual deck, but I think the Planeswalker thing is what keeps it from being in my paper deck. But again, the same things that said it's good for Cube. If you need something that's flexible, a little bit of life gain, a little bit of targeted damage, either on an opponent or on a creature or on a Planeswalker, like 3 damage to any target. I like lightning bolt things. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think Oath of Kaya was in my 4-color walkers deck when I was playing 4-color walkers, and I think that cards like this, like they sometimes slip in and out of popularity depending on the groups that you're playing with in Commander, because if you're playing with a pretty like hard control focus in your Planeswalker deck anyway, it's usually pretty mean to then add in, oh, by the way, if you ever try to stop my Planeswalkers, you can have an extra couple damage, right? So it can stack up pretty hard. However, again, when you are playing someone who's playing a Planeswalker deck, I don't know if I've mentioned this on the show, just know this. If you're ever playing someone who's playing Planeswalkers, just kill them. They do not have enough creatures to stop you. Don't worry about what their Planeswalkers do. Go straight for their face. Get them out on turn 4. And when they're like, oh, I didn't get to do what I was going to do. Well, they shouldn't have been trying to rein the board in with 18 Planeswalkers. Yeah. Just know that that's not your fault. That's their fault.
Literally 100 decision points per turn. Like
exactly. They've created the problem. You solved the problem by removing them from the game.
Yeah.
But that being said, like I like cards like this. I think that they're cool. I wish that for the purposes of a Planeswalker deck, I wish this said whenever an opponent attacks you or a Planeswalker you control with one or more creatures. Like
they probably, if you think about it, they probably did test that.
Oh, I'm sure they did,
and then found that like it was too much. Like,
yeah,
don't tax them for trying to player removal. Just tax them for trying to deal with the Planeswalkers.
Yeah,
might be what they tested.
I'm sure that had something to do with it. And again, like there are ways that you can in Commander you can get this into the graveyard and bring it back with startling efficiency, and then just start lightning helixing the crap out of everybody you know. So yeah, I like this card. I think it's good. I very much enjoy this card, and I'm a big fan of Kaya. So
that's fair.
Ups on that.
Angsty ghost lady.
Can't go wrong. All right.
So speaking of Commander and cards to play in it, so.
Hey.
One note here we wrote down. How did we word this? Connections to Commander.
Yeah.
So when you're looking at what set you want to dig into and open. One thing to know is kind of like what you're going to get in the box, which takes a little bit of digging sometimes. And I mean, I'm not suggesting necessarily that everybody like break out their abacus and start figuring out what could be in your box. But I mean, you can, and this is all something that like we did just looking at EDH Rec real quick and looking at a couple different stats and clicking through some of their filters. And we took a look to see what in Dominaria United was already being played in Commander. And more specifically, we took a look to see what commons are being played in Commander. Because when you open up a box, you're going to end up with, 67% of it or something like that is going to end up being commons.
Mm-hmm.
So that's going to be the majority of your pool. And you want to know if you're going to open it up, like, are you at least going to get enough stuff that is good enough to play in a regular Commander deck so that you know you can at least support your Commander deck out of a box using what you have. So we took a quick look at Dominaria United specifically, and we had, I reversed this. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I'm gonna continue.
Yeah,
on.
keep going.
So we took a look to see what cards in Dominaria United at common level are already being played in decks, and we went with all of them in the top 100. We took a look at the top 100, and we found 35 cards at common rarity are in the top 100 cards out of Dominaria United on EDH Rec. One thing to note specifically is this includes the 11 non-basic lands, which is useful to know that they exist in there because they will help make your deck function a little bit neater if you have access to them. You're going to end up with at least one in the colors that you're like. If you're a 3 color, you'll end up with the 2 you need. It's 10. Yeah. You'll end up with the 3 you need if you're 3 color. You'll end up with the 1 you need if you're 2 color.
Mm-hmm.
Like you will get them, but that's kind of not quite the point I was getting at. So I will say that like there's 24 that are full blown Magic cards that are in Commander decks now. I just listed the top 10. I didn't want to go through all 24. That's a whole pile of work. The one in the fewest number of decks was Smashed to Dust. At 4,235 decks, all the way up to Negate, which is in 270,088 decks. So these quick, I'm going to prattle them off, and hopefully I do them in an order that's slow enough that when I put them on the screen, they are not just like all thrown at you. Mm-hmm. You have Negate, Thrill of Possibility, Impulse, Essence Scatter, Bone Splinters, Phyrexian Rager, Broken Wings, Lightning Strike, Shore Up, and Smash to Dust. So these 10 cards, you'll hear at least 8 reprints. So we did notice that, and when we were looking at other sets too, we noticed that like reprints that come in the set, especially in the common slot, they're going to have high adoption numbers just because they're already been out and they've been put in decks. And Matt, during our discussions, you made the excellent point that when a deck is built, it's not so frequent that it gets revamped. Mm-hmm. So things like Negate being in 270,000 plus decks is because they just didn't go back and take it out. But now here's a fresh new printing. But what that did point out to me is that these cards are good enough to be in a lot of decks for a long time. Because keep in mind that for the most part, EDH Rex data is only 2 years old. They only really create the aggregate out of the last 2 years to date of decks that they find spread across the internet, your Mox Fields and your Architects and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So out of, when we actually figured this out, it was something like 2.5-ish million decks are used to, that's just a neat tidbit, 2.5 million or so decks are used to create this data. And I don't remember how many, like what the adoption rate was. We chose to ignore that. So like the percentage of how many decks it's in, just know that it's in like a lot of decks.
Yeah.
So when you're cracking your packs, you're going to end up with a bunch of commons that are really going to help tie your deck together. And we talked about this last episode, I think. Mm-hmm. The cards that you require, it was in like a cube, because you need like those cards that are boring, but to make your deck function.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a good point, if you don't mind me kind of stepping in. Looking at these top 10 cards, just seeing what we have here. We have card draw, we have counter spells, we have kill, we have direct damage or removal, like all of the things that are in this list that are important to regular Commander are also going to be important to you in a sealed pool, because they are the ways that you get rid of your opponent's stuff and make sure that you have new stuff to play. So like every single one of these is viable in any sealed deck that you would play the colors that they are in. I have seen people play Broken Wings as their 23rd card so many times.
Yep.
So the idea that Broken Wings is going to make it into a Boxmander deck that you build if you're playing in green, it's pretty high. So
Pretty high.
That's something that I noticed just like looking through this quick data, was that all of these cards, while they may not be the best cards that you would see in a constructed deck, these are certainly big players in something you would see in a Boxmander set.
Yeah, and that's because they are still technically good enough to be in constructed.
Yeah.
Right? So that's what you're counting on. Like, it's the top 100 was a very good distribution of bomb rares and mythics, top quality value rares and uncommons, and then these like absolute necessities in the rest of it. Like it's a really good spread. I honestly, if you're just like into looking at cards and checking out data, and this is like a weird Venn diagram for you, just check sets that you like in EDH Trek and see what's in there. It's pretty fun. It's pretty fun. And then the thing that I had skipped, because this is, I think we can go back to it now.
Yeah.
We also took a look to see cards that are in more than 10,000 decks. Now, some of these will still be like in the rares in the commons that we listed below. Actually, only 4 of them. So 4 of these cards that we already mentioned are in this list as well. But number of cards in more than 10,000 decks that are in any given set. What did we find?
We saw that 19 cards from Dominaria United were in more than 10,000 decks, and 8 of those were non-basics. So I'm thinking those are like Cave of Kolios, those kind of things, right?
Actually, surprisingly, I don't think that those were the.
Oh, those were not.
I think that list is actually just the like the 2 land type common ones.
Oh, okay, cool.
Or maybe I miscounted, honestly.
Yeah, maybe. But like the number of useful commander staples that come out of something, one, the better your Boxmander deck will work as a whole, but also the better it will be to transition any sort of Boxmander thing you do into a completed commander deck. If you end up liking the theme, if you end up liking the way that it played, and you just want to make some improvements and some upgrades here and there, the best way to start with that is starting with a Boxmander deck that will give you those things that you want to have later.
Yeah, I after our Boxmander, specifically with Dominaria United, and I was one of the Joda players that you were referencing earlier, and you asked me when we were writing up these show notes, hey, do you still have that list from your Boxmander Joda deck? And I went, I should. And I went and I dug it out. And it turns out it's actually just my paper Joda deck list now. The same link, the same thing. I completely wiped out the deck list that we were looking for because I then immediately took that whole pile and I just turned it into an actual commander deck.
Right.
Like, this is probably going to inspire you to build something in paper in the long run anyway, just a side note.
Yeah. And that's the thing. When you get to a point where you've put in a deck that is a Boxmander set, and then you just start minusing certain cards and plussing new cards, you know you've done it right. You knew that you hit something that's really cool because it's something that you liked enough to pull into a real deck.
Yeah.
And also on that vein, we have price point to value. So when you are looking at a Boxmander set, it's always good to remember that you are buying a box of cards, which is a somewhat expensive adventure. And you are also going to have to do something with those cards, whether you keep them or sell them or trade them or whatever. Something has to be done with all these remnant cards that you end up picking up. So looking at a Boxmander set, it's good to ask yourself the questions. Can you get this box? Like, is it something that you can pick up at a decent price? And are there things that in it that you can keep or flip or sell if you don't want them. It is wildly important to get your values worth when you are playing a format that costs you at least $100 to start.
Yeah, and it's going to be like if you're looking at doing Boxmander, like maybe you already kind of know which sets have value because you've been paying attention because you're trying to up your Commander experience. But it's going to be a little bit tough to figure out what you want out of a set because it's like cracking any box. But it is still something to consider. I do not want to take away from the point that is true. Like, don't find a set that you know you want nothing out of after.
Yeah.
Buy a whole box of it and then just like hate that you own it.
Yeah, it's a really bad idea to buy a box of Homelands for Boxmander, knowing that Homelands 1 doesn't have anything in it with any value to sell, and 2, knowing that there's nothing in it that you will want to keep or make something out of later. Like, Boxmander is not something to play for the memes most of the time. Just know that as a whole.
And like it's going to be tough to figure that out, and because like it's also, especially with standard sets these days, and like we're never going to attest to being like, we're mostly on the budget side, but the price of opening a box doesn't always come to the same total as the cards inside the box. And keep in mind, if you're selling or trading in like for store credit, like you're always going to get it for half-ish.
Yeah.
You know, if this is a $10 card, you're looking at $5 or $6 in return, either through trade-in or store credit or something.
Yeah.
And so like, kind of keep that in mind, I guess. I don't know how you would do it. This is a weird zone to be in.
I mean, I can talk a little bit about it. So when we talk about Dom-U, according to Card Kingdom and TCG Player, has about 5 to 6 cards that are over the $10 mark, and they are all pretty high level cards. So Shoulder of the Apocalypse in both forms, Liliana the Veil, Timeless Lotus, Silverback Elder, Sarah Paragon, and Plaza of Heroes, depending on which one you look at, are all decent prices for what they are. But as you might have heard from listening those off or looking at the cards on the screen, most of those are mythics. You're not going to hit a ton of mythics in your box. It's just not generally what happens. The ratios aren't built that way. So the idea of you getting any one of these particular cards to try to make some semblance of your money back is pretty small. However, knowing that you want certain cards out of that box and then the other ones you can flip, like if you're not a mono black player, even though Shoulder of the Apocalypse is a really, really good card, if you don't play black, you're probably not going to want it. So if you do get it and you can sell it to someone for $70, I say because it's marked as 75, or $60 because TCG says 60 instead, you could potentially make back some of that box. But it's more likely that you'll turn it into a store, they'll give you $35 for it in store credit, and you hold on to that, and maybe that helps you take a chunk off of the next box, which is nice. But just remember, you will never play this format, or you will most likely not play this format without incurring cost. And part of that cost is being wise about what you pick to play and what you pick to not play.
Yeah.
So
like it's mostly just like a consideration, but like you did say what I was thinking anyway, is that like this isn't going to be how do I play a game of Commander for free.
Yeah.
This is like, I'm going to spend money and I like the cards in it, but like any other opening packs, right? Like, and this is a great time to say it. Don't use this to buy cards, buy singles, right? Support your LGS. We're on board with everybody else on the internet, so we're not going to beat the dead drum. But this isn't for collecting cards. This is for playing Commander in a specific way. If owning all these cards isn't for you, I don't know what to tell you. Yeah. Maybe this isn't for you, but this is just another way to experience Commander and Magic in an interesting way with a fun restriction. And it is not a way to try and like invest in your retirement portfolio by cracking a standard set, more than likely, because those are the ones that are accessible, where all the card values have completely tanked and most of the cards are worth 30 cents.
Exactly.
Don't do it.
Exactly.
Don't do it.
Yeah. Open a box of Boxmander because you want to play Boxmander. If you can make it so that you get something out of it, great.
And not, well, then you experienced it. But and that actually kind of gives us around to like our last pile of points here is like newer is easier for a number of reasons, which kind of stinks when we were just like, don't buy this because the card values stink and don't do it for money. But specifically more recently with like the change in focus from Wizards development to have Commander in mind, the kind of as weird as it is to say, the newer the set, the better it's going to be for you. You're going to have more legendaries. You're going to have more cards designed with Commander in mind, even in the commons and uncommon slot, because they got to sell cards and they got to get it in the way. And it's where all the cool new junk is.
Yeah. I think it's really important to remember, though, that like when you're talking about something being newer, being easier to get a hold of, like when we say newer, remember that Magic is 30 years old. Like it doesn't have to be all will be one. Just because all will be one is the newest doesn't mean it's the best. It certainly is the easiest to obtain because it's still in print. It's still here. It's still kicking, right?
Yeah.
But I just saw that I can get a box of Kaldheim for $100, and I'm probably going to do it. And at some point, do Kaldheim Boxmander with somebody because I like Kaldheim. I think it's a cool set. I think it's a fun and a stable sealed format, but mostly it's because it's cheap and easy to acquire. I can get it to me pretty quickly without any hassle, and it is still in this new realm of design toward Commander products. So it still has multicolored commanders. It still has things that are splashy Commander type cards. It's also got Village Rites in it, which is a pretty good common.
I don't know what you mean.
Black card. For those listening to the audio version, Adam's got 2 giant packs of the masterpiece Village Rites just chilling near him at all times.
Just on my desk.
Just hanging
I love
out.
it. I love it so much. For a not mono black player, it's probably like my signature card, but whatever.
Yeah. So it's just one of those things that like pay attention to newer being easier, meaning newer last 3 years, last 4 years. Pay attention to price, pay attention to what you can get personally, because while I can get it for $100 here in the US, Adam is still dealing with almost normal standard prices for Kaldheim, even though Kaldheim hasn't been in standard for, 2 years?
Yeah. Yeah, I looked at my LGS, and my LGS had the cheapest one I could find was like 105 for a box of Kaldheim, and that was like the absolute lowest. But anywhere else I looked at what was the conversion on that one?
I think we said 150, something like that. So
150 Canadian.
Yeah.
Now I got to do the internets. 150 CAD to US,
which ended up being about
110.
Yeah, 110 American.
So like some of these sets that were like, and that's the other thing is if it was less. Like standard sets were printed to oblivion for the most part too. So like, I don't know, just be choosy. Take a look at your LGS, see what they got handy. If they got a box that's cheap, maybe that's the way you go.
Yeah.
But just like anything, honestly, I think the point of this is anything in the last like 4-ish, 5-ish years. There is a cat here. Hello. I was not calling you. Yes, pad out the time. Pad out the running length. Do it. Anyway, yeah. So stick with somewhere in the last 4 or 5 years, something where like the design philosophy had Commander in mind, and like the legendary stuff is there, and it's going to still be relatively inexpensive to acquire. Do not try and track down a box of Innistrad Original and try and Boxmander out of it.
Exactly.
Don't. You're not going to enjoy yourself. You're not going to, because they weren't designing for Commander at the time. You're going to pay an arm and a leg for it and not get your value out of it. Liliana of the Veil, which was printed in Innistrad originally, I didn't do that on purpose, but here we are, just got printed in Brothers War, and if you want one, that one's probably going to be cheaper and easier to acquire. you know?
Absolutely. The other big thing, we didn't write this down, but just as sort of a tail end to dovetail this nicely.
We are the worst people at writing notes down and then coming up with stuff after the notes are written. Sorry for interrupting.
It's all good. It's all good. But just to dovetail in, just remember, folks, that anything that you can do to make it work, do it. We talked about rule zeroing earlier on for legendaries. If you end up meeting someone and they're like, look, I got a box of Dominaria. I only pulled 3 legendary creatures and they're all monocolor. Like, I don't know how they did it, but, good on them, I guess. But if that's the case, just be like, hey, why don't you make 2 of your legendary creatures partners, and we'll just let you play a dual color deck with partners. There is no rule that exists in Boxmander, since it is a fan-made format of a fan-made format that stops you from doing what you need to do to make it work. So always keep that in mind, and just make sure that y'all are playing to have fun. Make the rules you need to make so that everybody can have a good time.
Yep. And if you want to find out about more fun and exciting ways to play Commander and play Boxmander, you can keep a handle here on us, and we will tell you more about it next time on Unlimited Commander. Have a great time. If you liked what we had to say, consider supporting us on Patreon. Your support goes directly to growing and improving the show.
You can also like, follow, and subscribe on YouTube or your favorite podcast app. Make sure to comment or leave a review. The cast can also be found on Twitter at Unlimited Commander.
You can find Matt's Twitch, Twitter, and other YouTube projects at knowledgepoolmtg.com.
And Adam can be found on Twitch and Twitter at Adamus_Prime86.
Our theme song is Polaroid by Harris Heller, licensed by Creative Commons.